Good morning and welcome to another episode of Project GaitWay. It's about 7 a.m. on Christmas Eve, and we're having a bit of a winter storm event here in Toronto and across a lot of Canada and even the US. So I'm a little bit stranded at home with not much to do. So Christmas edition of Project GaitWay. So today we are looking at Julien. Julien is an anatomy and motion student and practitioner. And he's sent me quite a list of current complaints that he's got. So I'll read those off first before we get into looking at his static alignment and his gait video. So he currently has some left lateral hip pain, left shoulder issues. He says impingement, lower back pain around the L4, L5 area, left metatarsal pain. I'm going to guess that's first metatarsal or maybe all metatarsals because he didn't specify. Pelvic and abdominal pain and tightness and weird neuro sensations in feet, which feels kind of like sand in shoes. And I can totally resonate with weird neuro sensations in feet, being still in a little bit of my process of figuring out the weird neuro sensations in my right foot. And lastly, he says he has a bit of a decrease in strength and power in the left leg. So lots of left-sided stuff. Remember, left hip, left shoulder, left foot, metatarsals, and then interesting general pelvic and abdominal pain. Yeah, so that'll be cool to look at. So we're going to start by checking out his static posture. And so we have him here in the front view. Let's just see what stands out. And I haven't looked at any of this yet. This is my first time. So be forewarned, I'm going to be bumbling and fumbling through this analysis, but that's kind of the fun of it. So the first thing that stands out to me, I'm just going with where my eyes are drawn, is to this right shoulder. But I guess I could be equally as drawn to the left shoulder, just in terms of there's a level difference. And the clavicles look quite different. You can see the slope of this clavicle versus the slope of that right clavicle. A bit of an elevation on the left side, perhaps. Or is it a depression on the right side? I'm not really sure, but there's a level difference. And it also has the appearance that this left clavicle is sitting a bit more posterior, like it's retracted a little bit. So that's kind of interesting. His head, next things that stand out to me is just a little bit of a level difference where it looks like the right side of his skull is higher than the left side of his skull. So if we think about him having some left shoulder complaints, and you can see that, to exaggerate, head's tilted to the left, and he has this elevated looking left shoulder, then you might see that there's just potentially a chronic shortening in the tissues there, that they're holding a bit more of a concentric kind of state. All right, what else stands out? If we look at the level of his pelvis, he also appears to have a bit of a hike on the left side. Perhaps we'll have to see from the back view. I mean, it's always, is that just the shorts or is that actually his body? So I'm not sure about that. I'm kind of seeing a bit of a rotation to the left through his spine, just based on what his rib cage looks like this part here versus this part here. It looks to me like on this left side of the rib cage, it's a little bit more stuck down, like the rib cage is a bit more anteriorly tilted on the left side. And then here, I have the look of like a flaring of the rib cage up, so a bit more of a posterior tilt, which to me it speaks to a left rotation in the rib cage, but that could be an illusion. It's always really challenging to see transverse plane on a flat screen, so we'll hopefully have a sense of that from the back view and from his gait videos. All right, I got not a whole lot to say about what's going on here yet. Let's put him into whatever his next view is. He did a really nice job of standing for a long time in each of these views. All right, I kind of want to fast forward you though into a back view. So let's just see No, there's the side views again. Okay, so the back view is going to be the last one he does. There we go. All right, let's just see him settle into that stance there. Great. So it's a little bit more revealing from the back view. I am going to say that it does look like there is indeed a left hike in his pelvis, and what also looks like a left lateral flexion through the spine. With, again, that head also tips to the left. So there's a very strong sense of a lean to the left. This left shoulder looks different from the back view. It still looks elevated like it did from the front view, but it actually looks like it's more protracted. So that's kind of cool. I've been seeing that lately. A scapula that, or that clavicle that from a front view looks like that whole shoulder girdle is retracted, but then from the back view, you look at it and it looks more protracted. So that doesn't really add up. And often when that's the case, what I think is happening is that there is an AC joint compression. You can imagine if there was a scapula that was protracted and a clavicle that was, to put the word retracted to it, it would cause a little bit of a jammy thing happening in the transverse plane in that AC joint. And almost always when I've seen that, there's a bit of discomfort involved. So I wonder if he ever had anything happen to that shoulder, like in an actual forceful accident kind of way. But I'm gonna guess there's a bit of AC joint issues on that side. Combined with that elevation and the head tipped towards, I could understand how that would feel quite gnarly. All right. And he says left lateral hip pain. So what we might theorize based on that hike of the pelvis is that all of these lateral hip tissues are going to be stuck long. That hike of the pelvis will bring length to all these abductor muscles like glute med, glute min, etc. So we might have length tension here causing some discomfort, shortness and compression here causing some discomfort. Now, if we look at his feet, both do appear to be a little bit, let's zoom in before I say anything. Both feet you can see are kind of turned out, which would indicate feet that are either stuck pronated or can't pronate, or both, likely both in one degree to another. This left calcaneus and rear foot looks a little more tipped inwards into an E version than this one does. So that is kind of interesting. Left metatarsal pain, I wonder, we'll have to see again from maybe the front view again, why is that left foot having metatarsal pain? Is it because he's more everted through the whole foot and that's putting more pressure onto the whole inner side of the foot and the metatarsals are getting more loaded up with his body weight, more pressure through them? I'm not sure. And does it look like he's putting more weight into that left foot generally? Often a hike of the pelvis we could associate with a leg that's more adducted, which would mean potentially more of his body weight sitting on it, coupled with his spine laterally flexing to the left and the weight of his skull tipping to the left. I could see how there might be a lot of pressure on that left foot, in particular on the medial side of that left foot, just based on the structural position of that left foot and the way his body is organized on top of that. Interesting. Okay, so we are going to rewind now or fast forward. It'll both get us to the same place. That's kind of cool, isn't it? You can rewind or you can fast forward and you end up in the same spot. I don't know if that's some kind of metaphor for life. Too early to be thinking about those kinds of things, or is it? All right, so it looks like he's in a pretty good resting spot here. I just want to say my hand that's holding my camera or my phone is getting really sweaty right now, and it's like slipping out of my hand. I must be like really sympathetically activated and excited to be doing this, or it's just like I'm on the 4th cup of coffee before 7 a.m. So either way, what is the resting position of his pelvis like? Does it look like he's in a posterior tilt or an anterior tilt or kind of neutral? And I'm not sure. It's always hard to say because of the slope of the shorts doesn't necessarily tell us much. If we could kind of extrapolate where his ASIS is and where his pubic bone is, are we seeing more of this configuration with the ASIS way in front of the pubic bone? Or are we seeing ASIS behind the pubic bone in space, posterior? I'm not sure. They look more or less lined up. Like I want to say that's kind of a neutral looking pelvis. I'm interested in that because of his abdominal and pelvic pain that he's been experiencing. What could be causing that? It sounds like it's kind of a general all over, not one side or the other. So I'm curious about sagittal plane organization in that regard. With his rib cage as well, does it look like more of a posterior tilt or an anterior tilt? And I'm not sure exactly. We'll just take a look at his left foot and evaluate the space you can see under the lateral border. And we're going to compare it to the other side, so there's nothing really to say yet. And also, what does his knee look like? Is it more extended, more flexed? And another thing I like to look at from the side view is how much of his chest you can see pointing towards us. You can't really see the front of his chest that much. So it might align with the theory that he has a rotation to the right through his rib cage. So let's take a look at his other side view and just compare any of that. Let him get rested into his feet. All right. And I have a bit of a sense of this knee being more flexed on the right. And I'm not sure if it's the lighting, but this foot, this space under the lateral border doesn't look as pronounced. He's got an interesting thing going on right here. Like that styloid process of the 5th metatarsal looks like it's sticking out to the side a bit more. So is that indicating this forefoot being a bit more adducted, which is a component of a foot supination? And what it did look like was that this left foot was more of the everted shape. So I wonder if we're just finding more evidence of that. But it's weird if you have a more potentially more supinated quality of a foot with a knee that's more flexed. Those things don't really, not supposed to really go together in the gait cycle anyway, for efficiency. I do get the sense that up here, you can see more of his chest. So I'm going to strongly suspect there's that right rotation through his spine. Now, I don't know, but from this view, I am getting the sense that his pelvis is more in a posterior tilt. I'm just processing that in my mind, hence the long silence. It's making sense to me that this would be a posterior tilt if we're seeing more of a supinated foot shape. And if you recall, we'll get him into the back view, that he had this hike on the left-hand side. A hike in the pelvis generally is going to go with more of an anteriorly oriented ilium. And the drop on the pelvis is going to go with more of a posteriorly oriented ilium. So there might be a bit of a torsion happening through the pelvis. That torsion, if that's what's happening, would potentially bias him to being better at stepping forwards with his left leg. Because this particular configuration of anterior tilt on the left, posterior tilt on the right, will make it easier to rotate his pelvis to the right. And that pelvis rotation to the right will make it easier to swing this left leg forward. That all combines nicely with his spine laterally flexing to the left. That will also happen when he puts his left leg forward and gets into that pelvic torsion. Because there is a moment in the gait cycle where the pelvis does naturally get into a bit of a torsiony state, but then it gets out of it right away. But if he's stuck in that state, that's kind of interesting. Okay, I think that's probably enough to go off of. I'm gonna probably forget all of that, but let's get into his gait video. And man, my hand is getting sweaty, but I'm gonna drink more coffee anyway. I'm happy to be sweaty with this, what they're calling a bomb cyclone that's hitting Toronto right now. It's like minus 27 outside right now, so I feel super privileged to be sitting inside sweating. Not all are so fortunate. Okay, let's watch his gait video one time in full speed and just see what stands out. We do see a bit of a rotation in his spine to the right, but not really to the left. We do kind of see more of a hike of his pelvis on the left, but not on the right. Okay, let's watch that again. It does kind of look like his left foot is a little more everted. I said that really weird. Everted. Okay, let's do a quarter speed and see what we see. Interesting stuff happens when he swings his left leg forward that I can't really describe yet, but it just doesn't look as flowy and comfortable. From this watching first time gait video perspective, looking at big things that stand out that we can then break down phase by phase. Now, I don't really see much rotational opposition in his spine in transverse plane. It looks like his pelvis and his rib cage kind of rotate as one unit. That'll be more clear when we go phase by phase. And it kind of looks like everything is stuck rotated to the right, but again, that's really hard to see. So we'll have to just do our best. Now I'm getting the sense that he does put a lot more heaviness into his left footstep, just kind of whole body weight wise. It looks heavier. That body leaning to the left. Spine really does kind of stay almost more tipped in a lateral flexion to the left, it looks like. And that rib cage never really rotates left. Okay, let's go phase by phase. So already getting a sense that there's a lot of stuff that doesn't really add up in a way that we'd like to for the body to feel at its best efficiency and pain-free. And we know he's got some issues, so it's natural to see a little bit of distortion going on. That's why we're doing this. All right, let's set him up in a left heel strike. So just to first take a look at his left foot as it first meets the ground. You can see that his toes are pointing out to the side quite a bit, so it's not really an optimal place to land. If you watch his spine, it does kind of look like he's already taking on this left lateral flexion and putting a lot of heaviness of his body onto that leg. In a heel strike, we'd like to see, to offload some of that impact of first contact, we'd like to see a bit of a lateral flexion away from that front leg. Not really too much to say just yet. So let's get him into the next phase. We're going to look at his left foot going into a pronated phase, loading or suspension phase. And what defines our suspension phase is when the big toe gets fully on the floor. Can't really see his big toe, so I'm just going to look for the place where it appears his foot stops pronating. So I'm going to say there. It's our best estimate. He does look to be quite, I want to say flexed through his spine. Like I get that sense that he's leaning forward with his body. We'd like to see in this particular moment in time a bit more extension in the spine, like a lift in the chest, the scaps depressing. So I was thinking about his abdominal pain. I wonder if he ever extends his spine. We'll have to take a look because that extension is going to create some length in the abdominal muscles. And could part of it be a persistent shortness in the abdominal tissues? I'm not really sure, just like wildly speculating at this point. We see the hike in his pelvis that was there on the left in his static alignment. And the lateral flexion in his spine persisting. Not much else to say at this point, so let's move him along into his mid-stance or transition phase. Roughly, we're going to go with when his feet are side by side in space, and we should be seeing a neutral body. He appears to be more flexed in his upper thoracics, especially. Both scaps looking like they're elevating. I'm not sure if that's causal or correlated or an indicator of a body that's in discomfort, because if I look at photos of myself or video stills of myself when I was having a tremendous amount of foot pain, my spine was super flexed. And I don't know if that's a protective response of the body or if that's actually contributing to the bad feelings in the body. Either way, it stands out to me. We still see a hike in that left side of the pelvis. So again, we're getting this sense of constant length tension in that side of the hip. So one of my first questions is, can that left hip abduct? Can he get his weight off of it? And can that pelvis drop on the left? And we're still seeing a bit of that lateral flexion to the left in the spine. So these things that don't change throughout phases are very interesting. We would like the body to look like it moves through different positions as we walk, not hold the same position. That's usually the indicator of where things are not super happy. Head tilted to the left again. So we're seeing that kind of shortening in these tissues here, upper trapezius, etc. Okay. Finally, let's get into some right leg forward faces so we can make a comparison. So the right leg swinging through into a heel strike. And the first thing that stands out is that his weight and his center of mass appear to still be on his left leg. If you want to watch that again, Looks like he's standing on his left leg. And watch to see if his pelvis actually shifts to the right. It looks like he hikes deeper, putting even more that length into that left lateral hip when he should be getting out of that hip and transferring his weight into his right leg. So that's interesting. What's keeping you stuck there, Julien? Wondering about injury history on the right foot. It did look like it had a bit more of that supinated structure to it. So I don't know, just speculating wildly about, could there be an ankle sprain? Ugh, man, I can't talk. Ankle sprain on the right. And with this kind of everted shape here that we're seeing, it really does look like there could be a lot of pressure in this metatarsal on the left, the first metatarsal area, combined with his weight being like straight down onto it. I wonder if that's contributing to that metatarsal discomfort on the left. Now, again, his spine is very interesting here because it looks like he's still holding this lateral flexion in the lumbars to the left, but then it looks like he starts to straighten up his spine here up top. So a bit of a interesting scoliotic moment, or could that be the right rotation? Yeah, it looks kind of like, yeah, quite a bit of a right rotation through his spine. So when we have a lateral flexion left and a rotation to the right, this is what we call a type 1 spinal mechanic in motion when we're looking at the flow motion model, meaning that you have spine laterally flexing. Bleh, man, speech is hard. Spine lateral flexing in one direction, but rotating in the opposite direction. So one of each of those directions. So that's just interesting, because that didn't look like that on his left leg forward heel strike. Let's take a look again. Yeah, it doesn't look like he really has that same degree of left rotation in his body. He looks like here he's holding more of a lateral flexion left. And spine doesn't really look like it's rotating much at all. So some of these issues are really showing up with this left leg forward, left leg mid stance, and left leg back are all kind of pointing to some wonkiness. Okay, let's go into just looking at his foot. He does appear to have a little bit nicer of a heel strike contact point on the right than the left. A little bit more lateral, which is what we'd like. So that's just a little nicer. So it's just interesting, really exaggerated kind of spine getting into a heel strike, but this lower body not really doing what it ought to on the back leg. Left leg is still hiked, still adducted, foot still everted. Okay, let's move on. So we're going to go into a right foot starting to roll into pronation, into a suspension or loading phase. And again, if you watch his spine, watch how it looks like he flexes and his scaps start to elevate here. Now that's interesting because when the foot pronates in gait, in that moment in time, we should start to see the spine extending. And on both legs, his spine is flexing. And again, I'm not sure if that's causal or a result of the discomfort he's having in both of his feet. Like if it was me and both my feet hurt, I would kind of brace when the foot fully lands on the ground. If there's a weird sensation, and that bracing could look like a spine flexing. But we don't know. We don't know the sequence of events here. So it's just a correlation at this point. That's very interesting. Can he extend his spine and get some length into those abdominals? Interestingly, pelvis looks rather flat, so he's never actually hiking on the right, which again makes me wonder, did anything happen on this leg that he's not able to feel safe fully adducting that hip and putting his body weight over top of that right foot? Ankle sprain, I don't know, knee issue, hip issue from the past, I don't know. That's something I'd want to ask about injury history on this side. Okay. And lastly, let's get him into his mid stance on the right. Feet are side by side. And this is where he does look quite level. Spine looks to be quite straight. And he's just got this head tipped to the left is the main outlier. But he really does, again, look like he's not fully grounded on that right leg, like he's already trying to get off and go to the left. So if we again just watch him go into his left heel strike and observe, does his pelvis shift to the left more than it looked like going to the right? Well, he's kind of doing the same thing actually. Can you see how he actually does hike up on that left side, or sorry, right side of his pelvis now? And instead of actually shifting his pelvis, there's a lot more of a lateral flexion in his spine to the left as he gets his mass into his left leg. And here's where I was saying there's kind of a weird thing going on with this whole left lower leg in this late swing. Right there, that's an interesting moment that shows quite a bit of external rotation in that tibia and quite a bit of whipping it around so the toes point a bit more forward. It's just a weird moment in time for a tibia to choose to do a weird twisty thing. Let's just follow that path. So he's in a left leg back. Tibia starts to externally rotate. That's great. Passes through. And it looks like right there, it just externally rotates a little more before it then flips forward. And then again, externally rotates a little more when he gets his foot on the ground. So that's super interesting. What happened here? Anything happened there? Why is there that much wiggling in that tibia? And if we compare that to the right side now, not as much external rotation and less of that flip around thing happening. It looks more smooth swinging through. So I don't really know what to make of that. Again, don't know if that's causal or a result of trying to figure out a way to walk comfortably. Let's take one quick look at him going towards us. So go right heel strike. You can see the hike of the pelvis on the left. A bit of that rotation to the right in his spine. Right foot starts to pronate. Look at when his toes get on the ground, right about there. It's interesting because it looks like here his left shoulder is higher, but we know that he consistently has this lean to the left of his body. Now I want to work with a bit of an assumption that something might have happened to this shoulder, because that kind of compressed look of an AC joint, I think that needs a bit of force to go through it for that kind of thing to happen. It doesn't just compress itself. I don't think so anyway. I'd love to hear more from people who have more education in AC joint things. With a bit of a compression there, it would make it maybe a challenge to get this right arm, or left arm rather, to swing forward through space, to flex. And so what we might be seeing is a tendency to can't flex my left arm. So I'm going to try instead to get it forward by rotating my spine to the right. Not sure. If we compare that to the other side, you can already see there's quite a bit more flexion in this right arm. It swings forward a little bit more, but his spine doesn't go to the left so much. It's a pretty common thing to see, is that discombobulation of arms and torso rotation not really lining up super great. Okay, so he swings his left leg through now. You can maybe watch from the front view what's a little fiddly thing happening with his lower leg. That right there. That's really interesting. I don't know what to make of it, but it's makes me want to investigate some knee mechanics with him. Can he flex and extend? Can he internally and externally rotate that knee? And if you look at when his left foot pronates, I want to say that it looks like it pronates a bit more quickly. And it does look a bit more everted. A bit more weight coming into the, oops, that's supposed to be his first metatarsal. It does look like there's more pressure generally, more actual foot contact on the ground on the first met, but also again, this sense of just more of his total body weight being stuck on the left side. And then we have him back to the beginning. I was just looking at his arms again here. So watch the flexion of his right arm. Right about here-ish is where we'd want to see the most amount of arm swing. And then let's compare that to the other side forward. That's kind of interesting. Okay, this is just like probably a detail I don't need to get sucked into, but just how clean it looks, this right arm flexing forward versus on the left, there's a, oops, I'll get that arrow out of the way. As its arm swings forwards here, on the left side, there's this sense that it elevates instead of a really pure flexion swing forward of the arm, like right there, it just starts to elevate. So we have a left arm, that flexion doesn't seem as clean, a right leg that he doesn't want to seem to get his weight onto. and a spine that seems to only rotate to the right, a left hip that doesn't seem to want to abduct, despite the fact that he has, or I guess along with the fact that this foot doesn't seem to want to supinate, it's stuck a bit everted. And a spine that seems to flex but not really extend. So that's a lot of things going on. And as always, at the end of these, I'm left with a few more questions than actual answers or practical solutions. As I always say, GAIT is a great entry point into discovering or figuring out what assessments you want to use that will be most meaningful for reorganizing the way that this body is moving. And what I would want to assess is the frontal plane in his hips and pelvis. Can he get to the right? Can he adduct the right hip? Can he abduct the left hip? Can his pelvis shift over there? Did something happen to this right leg that makes it unsafe feeling to get his mass over there? Or is it something about this shoulder? Did it have an accident and it's kind of keeping him stuck with this lean to the left? And did that set off a chain of events that's gotten him stuck onto this left leg? Because you could just make up a story that if there's some compression in the AC joint here, limiting the arm swing, causing him to want to elevate this shoulder, or being stuck with a shoulder that elevates and needing to make up for that in some way to swing the arm more comfortably. I'm going to rotate my spine more to the right to get that arm to swing. To get this shoulder to stop getting like elevated and jammed up, I'm just going to laterally flex my spine to the left. And if that's something that happened early on in his life, that could possibly impact how his hips are moving below. I really am not going to be able to say anything diagnostic, obviously, about the abdominal and pelvic pain, but there does seem to be a bit of perhaps a torsion in the pelvis and perhaps an abdominal area that never gets length. That could cause that, there's a lot of flow of nerves and blood supply that go down through the femoral triangle there. And if you're stuck flexed, it's going to really put a bit of a congestion through that space. So I'd be curious about assessing his sagittal plane spine, sagittal plane, pelvis, anterior, posterior, tilts, flexions, extensions. Can he move in and out of a flexion and extension? I'm sure these are things he's already working on. I'd love to hear about that. And then lastly, with this head that's kind of tipped off to the side, I'd just be curious, was there anything like a accident where his head got jostled to the side, impact to the head from the right? That again is contributing to this pattern of kind of leaning over to the left. And I just want to say as well is that if there is this potentially a history that started early on in life of having some boops and bonks, that it makes perfect sense that one would kind of be in a bit of a guarded state through the abdominal area and potentially lead to some issues. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks, Julien, for providing me some entertainment on my stranded bomb cyclone Christmas Eve. It actually looks pretty calm outside right now, but yesterday, man, it was a shit show. So just story to finish up. Yesterday, there were wind gusts of like 90 kilometers per hour and it was a flash freeze. So we had rain in the morning and that all froze in like the space of an hour. And I was walking through a wind tunnel. So there was this wind gust and the wind literally pushed me down the sidewalk on the ice, almost slid me into the street. So I had to reach out and grab onto a street pole to prevent myself from getting slid into the street and getting hit by a car. And I like mildly hurt my shoulder doing that. So man, no joke out there. Be safe. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Julien would love to hear back from you about any commentary I made. And thank you again for sending me in your video. Hope you all have a lovely Festivus season or whatever it is. I'm sensitive to the fact that holiday times can be quite depressing sometimes for most. I've been there myself. So have a Christmas, have a Hanukkah, have a Festivus. May it be what it is. And see you again next time for our next Project GaitWay video.